We're going to have John Powell come up. And then we'll have Angela come up. And John is the director of the current Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Ohio State University, and is really recognized as an authority in the areas of civil rights and civil liberties and a wide range of other issues, including race, structural racism, ethnicity, housing, poverty, and discrimination. And John will help us move a little bit into, so where do we begin to go, and how do we begin to go there? John.
So good morning. It's really a delight to be back here. Many of you know about 20 years ago, I was here and started the Institute on Race and Poverty that's now run by Myron Orfield. And I thought about bringing some maps, but then I thought, well, no, Myron's here, so I won't do that. So I have a PowerPoint, and as a good friend of mine, and Angela's Manuel Pastor always says, you only need two things when you have a PowerPoint, and that's power and a point. So hopefully I have those. But actually, I'm gonna take Ripa's advice, which was to think out loud. So I'm actually not going to focus on the PowerPoint so much. I think that a lot of the statistics and data has already been laid out. So I want to just actually think out loud with you for about 15 minutes. And then I also want to mention 3 or 4 books that I think are important as we sort of think of how to go forward. You have a really wonderful opportunity here. And many of you know that at Curwen Institute, we actually do a lot of our work around opportunity structures, and we literally map out opportunity. I started that when I was here at the Institute on Race and Poverty, first doing opportunity maps. And I remember some of the people here, Vina Kay, and I don't know if Marguerite's here, but literally we were drawing maps with crayons. So the technology has moved beyond crayons. But we use as many as 14 and 32 different indicators to map out the distribution of opportunity. And then we actually look at where populations are in relationship to that opportunity. So we situate people within the opportunity structure throughout the region. And the opportunity structure in most regions, in this sense, Minnesota not being an exception, is deeply racialized. But you can look at where opportunity is, and based on that, you can make predictions about people's life outcomes, about how long they will live, about will they be exposed to crime, will they graduate from school, and that's independent of their race or economic situations. That opportunity structures don't guarantee success, but it greatly enhances it. And in fact, all of us actually try to get as close to opportunity as we can. People come to Minnesota for opportunity. People come to the United States for opportunity. Wilkinson has just written a wonderful book called Warmth Above the Suns. And she talks about the great migration, the greatest migration in American history of people of African descent leaving the South in search of opportunity. And unfortunately, sometimes at the end of that long journey, there is denial of opportunity. So we structure things sometimes so there's a lack of opportunity. And that's really what this is about. That's really when we talk about equity, that's what we're talking about. And my friend Angela Glover-Blackwell is here. And years ago, when regionalism was first taken off, many people, appropriately or not, sort of credit Angela and myself for really pushing equity on the agenda of regionalism. And so I'm delighted to see, as we think about the corridors of opportunity, that equity is built into that language, at least. How to build it into the actual practice. And how to build in such a way that it's not profoundly racialized. Now, you've already heard about some of the disparities. So a couple of books I want to mention to you. One of them is called Spirit Level by Wilkinson. And Spirit Level is basically a book by 2 healthcare workers from England. And they look at multi-country inequality. And what they find is that the greater the inequality, the less a whole number of outcomes, including, and this is interesting, for example, how long you live is actually correlated with how much inequality exists in your country. Now, you may expect that for those at the bottom, but it actually depressed the life outcomes at those at the top. And how much incarceration is directly related to inequality. And so they do this study, which is interesting. They do it across countries, and then they do it within the United States, comparing states. And Minnesota has traditionally been one of the states that have had less inequality and performed better on a whole set of indicators. Now, you might say, well, how can that be when all these tremendous inequalities exist that we just heard about? Well, a couple of things. First of all, until fairly recently, there were not that many people of color in Minnesota. Those numbers are changing. So as those numbers change and the inequality persists, it actually threatens the sustainability, the viability of the entire state. Not just for blacks, not just for Hmongs, not just for Latinos, but for the whole state. So what's at risk, and I think this is important because I think some people will think, well, we'd like to help those people, maybe, but and there's always a but, right? But this is not about those people. This is about us as a state, as a region, and as a country. We did some work in Cleveland, again, working with Angela and others, and the tagline we used was growing together. So it's not simply about redistribution. It's actually about growing. So another book I'll share with you is a book called The Race Between Education and Technology. And in that book, by Katz, the author looks at what propelled the United States to the #1 economic power at the beginning of the 20th century. And what they found, again, looking over a lot of data for the last 200 years, is that the United States was the first industrial country to begin to educate women. And so in a sense, the United States was playing with almost a full deck. Now, they weren't educating women fairly, and in fact, when I started school, most of the elite schools actually wouldn't allow women in. So, but they at least made the effort. We made the effort, and that effort paid off. So today, the 50% of the population that is the same as women at the beginning of the 20th century are kids of color. So if the United States failed to educate or miseducate children of color, we will be conceding our role in the world, while other countries are stepping up, trying to educate their entire population. And we keep talking about a knowledge economy, and we keep defunding the institutions of knowledge. There's something strange happening here. And I was just at an event with Dorn from Isaiah, Dorn Srimes from Isaiah, and she noted that if you look at the investment, and she's not the only one, people at the UN has actually noticed this, that across the world, the UN has noted across the world, they see one of the greatest dangers across the world is actually disinvestment in public infrastructure, and it's highly correlated with countries becoming racially, economically, and religiously diverse. So it's not just phenomena in the United States. It's not just phenomena in Minnesota. So as we have blacks, Latino, Hmong, as people start to, quote unquote, look different or worship differently, then our appetite for supporting public institutions starts to wane. The former Secretary of Labor, Robert Rice, basically said, he talks about the succession of the rich. He said the rich are succeeding from the country and really trying to close themselves in private enclaves. So you have this explosion of gated communities, which is sort of the extreme version of fragmentation. And we know for years that the more fragmented a region, the more inequality and the less vibrant. Again, Twin Cities is sort of a case in point. It's been used many times as an example of a region that actually dampens its fragmentation with tax-based sharing. And so even though you have many different jurisdictions, you have tax-based sharing that actually reduces that inequality and has made you one of the powerhouse engines of the country for the last 30 or 40 years. That's all being challenged now. And it's being challenged at a time when the racial, ethnic, and religious diversity is starting to explode in Minnesota. Maybe that's just an accident. Maybe that's just an interesting correlation. Another book I want to mention to you. You know, William Julius Wilson, some of you will know his work. When Wilson wrote a book about 15 years ago called Declining Significance of Race. And basically he argued that class issues were starting to become more important and more significant. And my white liberal colleagues use that book almost like the Bible, you know? It's like you say something about race and they say, have you read William Julius Wilson? And I say, yeah, I have read William Julius Wilson. Wilson has written a new book very recently called Beyond Race, or More Than Just Race. And in this book, he repudiates his earlier position. He actually says he was wrong. Now, it's an interesting book, and it's a short book. I would commend it to you. But he says, you know, there's racial things, and then he talks about structure and culture. And he actually basically said there's some cultural things that marginalized communities, Black, Latino, need to pay attention to, but there are these structural things that actually also are important in terms of life outcome. And he says when you weigh the two, structure significantly outweighs culture. The structure, the way we structure society, the way we structure our opportunity has a much more powerful impact on life outcomes than culture. But he also says that while class is important, that there's a profound interrelationship between class and race, and that race is actually more important in terms of predicting and understanding U.S. policies and programs. And it's sort of interesting. None of my colleagues have sort of presented that book to me. Maybe they don't know about it. But my point is that you have this wonderful opportunity here, and you have the resources to do it. Not just for Blacks, not just for Latinos, but for the state. You have been one of the sort of beacons in the country in terms of how to actually do this right. And you have invested. And some people call it taxes, but it's an investment. You invest in people. You invest in your most important outcome, your most important product, which is people. Investing not just for economic reasons, but also for cultural reasons and for democratic reasons. And you have people participate in that. That's been the history of Minnesota. But now as you become racially diverse, that history is being challenged. And you have this wonderful opportunity with the quarters of opportunity to actually structure. That's interesting. You can do this wrong and create a structure that will profoundly lock in the racialized patterns for decades. Doesn't mean that anybody's being racist. It doesn't mean that people are being hateful. But the outcome will be profoundly locking in patterns of racial isolation when the racial other is exploding. Or you can figure out how to actually create opportunity, equity, that really brings everybody up, that allows you to grow together. That's the challenge that's before you. And you have wonderful leaders, but you also have some really serious fights. So you have this opportunity. And part of the opportunity is about having people who are marginalized at the table. So I'm going to end by just leaving you with one idea. It's an idea that Gary Cunningham, my good friend and spiritual brother, we call him, brother with another mother, have been working on for the last few years, and that's the idea of targeted universalism. And I present that idea to you because sometimes there's a notion of, well, we're just going to do something for everybody. And what we oftentimes do is adopt what I call universal strategies. And then we notice that they don't help all people the same. And the adage is that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I actually have a slide from New Orleans after the levees broke. And it's people in a boat, and then you have the little clip saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. And there are people in a car saying, here comes that rising tide again. So some people don't have a boat. And a rising tide means they're going to drown. So if the goal is to make sure people don't drown, we have to acknowledge that people are situated differently. So the goal can be universal. We don't want anyone to drown. The strategy has to be targeted. The strategy has to be targeted based on people's situatedness. And it doesn't mean they're asking for special pleaders. Another example I use is that if you're at the bottom, if we're trying to get everyone to the third floor and we build an escalator. And then someone comes along in a wheelchair. We don't say that person is asking for special pleaders when they ask for an elevator. We're saying that person is situated differently than the person who doesn't have a wheelchair. The reality is that we're all situated. We're all situated throughout structures of opportunity, and we're situated differently. Sometimes it's by race, sometimes it's by age, sometimes it's by disability. Everybody's situated. Those in the dominant group oftentimes doesn't notice that they're situated too. So what we're saying is that how do you grow together? How do you get everyone to the third floor? And sometimes you can build an escalator. For some people, stairs will be fine, but some people will need an elevator. And that's really all that we're asking, that you really take this into consideration and recognize that, yes, Gary is my brother, but so are all of you, that we really are in this together. And if we're going to move forward, we can only move forward as a whole team and not fighting each other. Thank you.
Much, John. Every time John talks about this, the message that he says gets clearer and clearer and clearer and goes deeper and deeper. Some very fundamental ideas, but very, very significant. Again, thank you.